Welcome to the Confluence cast presented by Columbus Underground. We are a weekly Columbus-centric podcast focusing on the civics, lifestyle, entertainment, and people of our city. I'm your host, Tim Fulton. This week, Jesse Perkins was Ohio's first black woman lawyer, a trailblazer who defied expectations and carved out a career in criminal defense at a time when both her race and gender made it nearly impossible. But her story is not one of simple triumph, it's one of controversy, resilience, and ultimately downfall. In this week's episode, I sat down with Jesse Bethea, a freelance features writer at Columbus Underground and author of Daisy's Way, the wild and tragic career of Ohio's first black woman lawyer. It's a 4-part series that unpacks Perkins's complex legacy. We explore her rise to prominence, her high-profile legal battles, and the perjury conviction that ended her career. From courtroom drama and political ambition to police misconduct and systemic bias, we discuss the forces that shaped Perkins's fate and what her story reveals about justice, then and now. Whether you see her as a legal maverick, a victim of discrimination, or a cautionary tale, Jesse Perkins's story is one that demands to be told. You can get more information on what we discussed today in the show notes for this episode at theconfluencecast.com. Enjoy the interview. Sitting down here with Jesse Bethea, freelance features reporter for Columbus Underground. Jesse, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. Long-time or medium-term listeners of the podcast will recall we talked to you a couple of times about the story about the North Market graveyard. First of all, any updates on that?
None that I can share.
Okay, fair. We're talking today on the occasion of a 4-part series that's currently trickling out on Columbus Underground about Jesse Perkins. Mm-hmm. Who is Jesse Perkins?
So Jesse Perkins was the first black female attorney in the state of Ohio.
Okay.
And she practiced law in the 1920s here in Columbus. And she was a lawyer, a criminal defense attorney for about a decade until she was essentially, I would say, railroaded out of her legal career by the local legal establishment and sent to prison.
Okay. How did you come across this story?
So this started a few years ago for my day job. I work for the Ohio Channel, and we were at that time looking for historical Ohioans or that we could do short videos about for Black History Month.
Okay.
Specifically, Black Ohioans who were involved in important legal decisions or important moments in the state's judicial history.
Okay.
And so
not civics in general, literally.
No.
Judicial.
Very specifically, having to do with the law. And so it was pointed out to us that, this was the first black female attorney. I didn't know anything about her, her sort of ignominious end. But in researching it, and I have to give credit to the librarians at the Supreme Court of Ohio Law Library, they dug up a lot of material for me to make this video. And so I did a lot of research, found a lot of interesting information that I hadn't seen reported elsewhere.
Did you end up doing the video?
I did, but it was ultimately I felt too short. Just the format wasn't. I didn't have as much space as I wanted to talk about all the details of what happened.
Okay.
So I started basically 3-ish years ago writing this series.
Okay.
And just sort of trying to get it like, how can I, because it's actually a bit of a complicated narrative to explain. And so I was trying to condense it and get it concise.
Okay.
But also have all the facts and as I understand them to bring this story to light, because there's really...
So it's fair to say basically you did a smaller version of this project.
Yes.
And then you brought it to Walker and Columbus Underground and were like, I want to do this.
Right.
It's not a secret that you are doing it on the occasion of Black History Month either.
No, I mean, I would have done it anyway.
Right.
But I got to a point where I was like, this feels ready to go. And it happens to be Black History Month. So I said, well, this makes a lot of sense to put it out.
Let's do a little bit on sort of how you talked about the Supreme Court library. Sure. Talk about the research and the work that you did to sort of put this together.
Well, so I focused a lot of my attention on, similar to what I did with the Graveyard series, on going through the archives of the Columbus Dispatch and, to a lesser extent, the Ohio State News, even though that was not really in operation in the 1920s, but other newspapers were.
Okay.
And so all of their archives, the Dispatch archives, are all in Columbus Library. Mm-hmm. And the Columbus Library also has on their third floor, in their genealogy section, they have this very interesting section where it's literally just big cabinets full of manila folders with different topics.
Okay. Like clippings that have been tagged as this article is around this topic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so as I was in the process of doing that, I was like, well, I wonder if they have anything about Daisy Perkins. And one of those manila folders is labeled Daisy Perkins.
Okay.
And they have a bunch of clipped articles that I had never seen before, not even in their online archives.
Okay.
And so I was able to get that information. And I would say the more vital thing that I received was from the librarians at the Supreme Court. They gave me the full appeal that Daisy Perkins filed with the state Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court.
And so let's jump to what happened.
Right.
Like what happened. So she practiced, you said, I think for 10 years.
Between 1920 and I think she was admitted to the bar in 1919, and she was disbarred in 1928.
Okay. And there was one specific case. She was, what's the gentleman's name she was defending?
Leon Knight.
Leon Knight murdered his mother-in-law.
Yes.
And she got him off for it.
She got him. She didn't get him off. He did go to the Ohio State Penitentiary. He was convicted. He definitely did it.
Okay.
Let me be clear about that.
Yeah.
What she managed to do was convince the jury that he might have acted in self-defense.
Okay.
And because of that, the jury recommended mercy. The jury recommended that he not be executed.
Okay.
So that was what she didn't save him from going to jail, or to prison.
Right.
But she saved him from going to the electric chair.
Okay. And then some folks probably were not happy with that.
Specifically the county prosecutor at that time.
And so the county prosecutor ended up charging her with soliciting perjury.
Yes.
Who was the star witness she had?
So the witness was a man named Abraham Small. This was also a black man who lived on the east side, and he was friends with Leon Knight.
Okay.
Small testified that before the shooting, Leon Knight's brothers-in-law came to him and asked to borrow a gun, and for the specific purpose of killing Leon Knight.
Oh.
So that introduced the idea that this was.
And if Leon Knight had found out about this, it is possible to believe that he believed that there was a risk to his life.
Right. Or even if there was another gun there besides Leon Knight's, that means there might have been a shootout and there was collateral damage, and he's still responsible, but he did not go there with the intent of murdering his mother-in-law.
Okay. Did he have a motive for murdering his mother-in-law? Or what was
it
positive?
Seems that he did not get along with his wife's family very much.
Okay.
His wife's name was Roxy Knight, and then his mother-in-law was named Mary Hill. Mm-hmm. And then she had a number of sons as well, and they were all in this one apartment on the east side, and there was some sort of altercation between Leon, his brothers-in-law, and then his mother-in-law was also there at the same time.
And she was killed. Okay. And so the Franklin County prosecutor at the time, then the case ends.
Yes.
He gets mercy. Mm-hmm. And then what is the process that they sort of went through to get against her? Like what?
So the prosecutor, basically the crux of the prosecutor's argument is that when Abraham Small testified at the grand jury,
okay,
he didn't say anything about these brothers asking to borrow a gun.
Okay.
So, and that testimony appeared only after the fact at the
And for those that aren't aware, the grand jury is basically what you go to before you bring charges in order to basically get, quote unquote, permission to bring charges.
Right. But the interesting thing is that the brothers of the sons of the woman who was murdered.
Okay.
They told the grand jury they did go and ask to borrow a gun from Abraham Small. So the prosecutor then contends, okay, so Daisy Perkins got this testimony from the Hill brothers that they gave to the grand jury, and then she went and showed it to Abraham Small so that he could say the same thing on the stand later, which would be illegal.
Soliciting perjury.
Exactly.
Right.
But the only evidence that he had that she did that is Abraham Small is claiming that. But he was prosecuting Abraham Small for perjury.
Sorry, just repeating it back.
Sure.
The brothers said to the grand jury, we went and got a gun against this guy because we really didn't like him.
Yeah.
We went and got it from this guy, Mr. Small. And then the prosecutor is basically saying, well, Mr. Small never told us about this, hence that is perjury.
Yes.
It's not perjury. It's just a fact that...
No, and this is also coming at the same time as the prosecution, even when the night trial is underway, the prosecution is trying to prevent Small from testifying, even to the point that after he does testify, they have detectives basically follow him out of the courthouse and assault him and then arrest him for perjury. And the only reason they think that he has committed perjury is because he said something different at the trial than he said at the grand jury hearing.
Even though that information was already stated in the grand jury.
Exactly. And witnesses change their testimony all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've been bribed or,
And so the prosecutor then, because they have not, apparently 1 pound of flesh is not enough, they then want to go after the defense attorney as well.
Exactly.
What's the argument that they make that she solicited perjury?
Well, they get testimony from Small, who again they are in the process of prosecuting. So this is a carrot and a stick situation. Small, if you tell me that Daisy Perkins bribed you to change your testimony,
we'll go light on you.
Exactly, and they did. He was never convicted of perjury.
Okay,
she was convicted of asking him to perjure himself, but he was never convicted of perjury.
And so she tries to defend herself. She says, this is ridiculous. She says, that here's where this information came from.
And as far as I can tell, and again, there's a limited historical record here.
I assume you don't have direct transcripts of the case.
I have transcripts of the night trial, but not her testimony, not her own trial.
Got it.
Because I don't know what sort of physical evidence, but based on the briefs filed by John Chester, the prosecutor at that time, he never says and we have this document that proves that she did this. All they seem to have is the testimony of a person they were trying anyway.
So end of the day, I think we all sort of know where this is going. She gets prosecuted.
Yes.
She does get convicted.
Yes.
It's not super important to the story, but she actually doesn't turn herself in to go to jail.
On the run.
She goes on the run. Is there an interesting part of that, or is it just
it's interesting that she went on the run and she was on the run for about a month.
Okay.
and it's kind of funny because in the newspaper archives, there are every now and then there's an article that'll pop up that's like, Daisy Perkins resurfaces in Cleveland and files a legal brief or something to
so
continue.
She was doing it.
She was still sending petitions of appeal from, as she was traveling around the state, not being arrested.
Interesting.
And so finally she's located at her sister's house in North Baltimore.
Okay.
And they arrest her there and bring her back to Columbus. And she is sentenced to go to Marysville, to the women's reformatory there.
And and I imagine disbarred.
She is disbarred at that time, yes.
And as you sort of talk through in the piece, sort of lives an unmiraculous life after that.
Yeah, she goes to prison. She is offered parole a few years in and actually refuses it. I don't have... there's not an explicit reason why she refuses. I suspect it's because you have to admit wrongdoing, and she...
You have to supplicate yourself too. Yeah.
She was adamant that she did nothing wrong.
Okay.
So she serves the rest of her term until she's finally paroled again in 1937. She does seem to take that parole, and she lives the rest of her life in Columbus, and She never practices law, but she seems to have been a very active member of St. Paul AME Church on the East Side. A lot of their bulletins that have shown up in my research feature her as like on a bunch of different committees and whatnot through the 1940s. And then she died in 1963.
Okay. And is the motivation for her prosecution, is it entirely surrounding this one case? Or is it this person's a thorn in our side, there's racism, sexism as part of it?
I mean, I don't think you can I don't think you can discount that there must have been some racial and misogynistic motivation.
Yeah.
Having said that, I also just don't discount that lawyers often make a lot of mistakes and sometimes repeatedly, and they can. So I do try to leave space in the article and in my own mind that she definitely could have made mistakes. She might very well have even, everything I just described about soliciting perjury or bribing witnesses, it's very possible she did all that.
Okay.
But the fact is her prosecution was, would not hold water in modern times.
Okay.
For one thing, she was a political opponent of the prosecutor himself. She ran against him for county prosecutor.
Oh, okay.
The year before she was tried.
Okay.
So there were all kinds of reasons why he had a conflict of interest. I mean, he had just tried the night trial. Like they had just been opponents and he
was pissed off that he didn't get what he wanted.
Right. So I don't think there's any way that in a modern situation he would have been allowed to personally conduct this prosecution against her. I think we would understand now that a special prosecutor or somebody would have been appointed by the court to see it through if there was legitimate evidence.
Well, and even if these conflicts didn't exist, this is not the kind of case that you try.
Yeah.
Like the argument being that lawyers are going to make a good faith effort to get within the bounds of the law and within the bounds of the court process, but they're going to make their best faith effort to get their client the best deal they can.
Sure.
That's what she was trying to do. She may have made a mistake, and that's the space we're sort of leaving for that. But even if that mistake had happened, it should be acknowledged, she would not have been prosecuted in this way.
I'm. It's always bad to make these grand generalizations, but can you imagine a white male attorney in the 1920s doing something shady like that if she really did it and going to jail for 10 years?
I can't imagine a black female attorney these days having that happen to them, right?
Yeah.
So a product of the time, I think, is sort of what we're, if not directly saying, at least inferring. Talk about sort of her just general, like, what was her life before that?
She seems to have been a very driven woman. I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
But she was
she's an attorney. She's trying to be a politician. Yeah.
I mean, she ran for office, every conceivable local office in Columbus throughout the 1920s. She ran for school board. I believe she ran for city council. She ran for county prosecutor more than once, under party affiliation and as an independent. She seems to have. One thing I note in the article is that there are a couple of instances where she seems to annoy even the black male legal establishment.
Okay.
But they have a habit of coming to her defense eventually. Like she is sort of
she ruffles some feathers, and it doesn't matter whose feathers they are.
Yes.
Got it.
So overwhelmingly, they're men's feathers, but because there are black attorneys or black male attorneys who don't seem to like what she's doing, but one of them ends up defending her, as she's appealing this conviction. So clearly, I think there was an understanding that like she might be difficult, for us to work with. This
isn't right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What else should we know about Daisy Perkins?
I mean, that's a good question because there's a lot of things I want to know about Daisy Perkins still.
Again, to be clear, most of the records that you have are, one, whether she ran for these things, the church bulletins, and then the court records.
Yes.
So the sort of like, how do we navigate historically, again, a little under 100 years ago, what was this person like, and how did they live their life, and why?
I personally want to know more about her life after prison and what she devoted herself to. It seems that she devoted a lot of her time to church work. She never married. She never had children. She seems to have had a lot of friends and relatives. But I do wonder because she lived a long life. She outlived her rival, John Chester.
Okay.
And she was also older than him to begin with, so that, she saw the world change around her in a lot of interesting ways. And I do wish I knew more about how she felt about all that, because I'm sure
I mean,
I guess I imagine,
right?
She was wronged. Yeah. I mean, she was frankly wronged. And I imagine there were times when she must have seen changes in the city, changes in the country, and thought, it's really frustrating that I was left behind because of this, frankly, injustice.
Yeah. And yet, based on the documents surrounding her life, she rose up, right? And unfortunately was then torn down.
Yes. Yeah. I think that too is, I mean, the articles before her trial, it does seem that she became a bit of a local celebrity at times, but maybe not in like a generous way. I imagine that the newspapers sort of treated her as a novelty.
Yeah. And we have them today.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And so it was...
This person is always speaking up. This person is always like getting just enough signatures to get on the ballot.
That too, but I think it was also a bit of like, look at this black woman practicing law. Isn't that fun? Isn't that interesting? And so there were a number. I think that was the news hook, I think.
Okay.
Because I mean, media was very different back then. They covered all kinds of things that we wouldn't really think of as news now. But
yes,
it's hard for me to imagine that, they were covering the exploits of every attorney in the city.
Yeah.
I think there was a bit of a novelty of like a bit of a...
But at the end of the day, they want readers, right?
Yeah.
Just like everybody does, right?
I got the sense from reading them that there was some entertainment value to covering her career. And that too, I mean... Maybe it wasn't her preferred way of getting notoriety. I doubt that it was, but it did give her notoriety. And that too, I imagine, turned a lot of people against her.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is all press is good press. It's getting her notoriety to the point that, she's probably getting hired more.
Sure.
Lifts her billing rate.
Yes. And there is they note, all of these articles note when she's defending a black person.
Okay.
And that's the majority of the time.
Okay.
So I imagine that it was understood by the black population of Columbus at that time, like, we need lawyers who look like us and who are going to defend us. But at the same time,
that wasn't exclusive, though. I mean, not every black person on trial was defended by, right?
No, but she was also defending, she appears to be defending a lot of women. Especially in situations where they need divorces. And the other, she at least at one point was defending an Eastern European immigrant in a way for some sort of prohibition trial.
Okay.
And that too is noted by the Dispatch in their articles of like they sort of they quote him, the defendant, but they make a point of using like the accent, to say like, oh, this person is foreign.
They wrote the quote phonetically as well?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's not racist.
Right, yeah.
Oh, you didn't know what he was saying, but you can spell it out phonetically?
So you can see a little bit of like the media at that time may have treated it as like there's entertainment value. Like, wow, black ladies defending a funny European man.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think when you parse together the individual things that she did, she was guided by the goal of doing good.
Sure. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Even if, frankly, this guy murdered his mother-in-law. That's not
absolutely
okay.
Yeah.
But if it's to get the guy off death row and like But we don't know what her even like opinion about death row is, right? We don't know if that's the motive.
No, I mean, and
she defended him throughout the case.
Yes,
it was not just sentencing.
No, it was throughout the case.
Yeah.
But defense attorneys don't have to have motives. Their only motives are to do what's best for their clients. And I think that's what she wanted. I think she recognized, I'm not going to prove this guy didn't kill his mother-in-law, because he definitely did. But what I can do is keep him from going to the electric chair. And
based on the evidence that I'm aware of.
Exactly.
Right.
And she managed to do that.
Did the press surrounding this guy not going to death row was it a big splash? Like, Franklin County prosecutor fails case.
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, it
was
not even
personal.
Yeah, and I mean, if I'm doing a little bit of pop psychology on people who've been dead 100 years,
right?
John J. Chester. I mean, that was a prominent family, and still is in Columbus. His son went on to be a rather famous attorney, representing somebody involved in Watergate. I think it was
okay.
And his father, the prosecutor, John Chester the First, was also a prominent attorney, and all the way back, into the 1800s. So I think that this person, who was very young, John Chester the Second,
okay,
I think he had a lot of pressure to sort of live up to a family reputation. And he ended up later. He was involved in a very prominent prosecution of I forget his first name, but the Snook case. The famous OSU professor who murdered his mistress.
Yeah,
he was the prosecutor on that as well, and that sort of made his name. But then later in the 30s, he ended up getting tangled up in some corruption scandals after he was no longer the county prosecutor. His replacement actually did a wide-ranging investigation of public corruption, and both him and his detective, who was involved in slapping Abraham Small around, they both got tied into this sort of... They were collecting money from gambling dens and giving it to the county Republican Party. And they weren't supposed to be doing that.
No, I wouldn't imagine.
And then a few years after that, they both, for some reason, got into a giant drunken fight on High Street, and 100 people watched it. And it was a big enough fight and so violent that it ended up in the Dispatch.
Okay.
So things got a little rocky for him after this situation. But I do think I can imagine that like there was some reputational protection going on of like, even though he won this case, I think they're just having been bested a little bit. Led him
by
to
not getting the
death
sentence that he wanted. At the end of the day, what do you hope people sort of take away from the story of Daisy Perkins?
I mean, I believe at one point there was discussion of a pardon. I haven't really been able to find a lot of details on that. And I'm not advocating that, I wouldn't advocate that she be pardoned. But I would like people to take another look at this and to recognize this as sort of something that happened that probably shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And
so at the end, let me translate it.
Sure.
At the end of the day, this is the first black woman who's an attorney in the entire state of Ohio.
Right.
And look what you did to her.
Exactly. And I think the simplest question is to be like, okay, well, we know the firsts of all kinds of stuff. We know the first person to walk on the moon. We know the first black man on the Supreme Court.
Yep.
We know the first woman on the Supreme Court or on the Ohio Supreme Court.
And the first black woman in the state of Ohio who was an attorney has an asterisk next to her name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the article, I think I said, if it had ended any other way, we would have named a library after her or something.
Yeah.
I mean, Columbus loves to celebrate its heroes like that.
Yeah.
But we can't celebrate this hero because of this thing. But the thing seems pretty shady.
Yeah. So maybe not a pardon, but a library.
Maybe not a pardon, but a library. I mean, I don't need her to receive anything except for a little bit more attention.
Yeah. Well, and also maybe a bit more of acknowledgement that the Columbus way, and I'm using a capital W there, that the Columbus way is hers and is not always as clean. It's not always Jerry Mock. It's not always like, look at this female pilot that did this great thing. I'm not discrediting Jerry Mock at all. However, that like people come to pioneering places and sometimes it doesn't always work out. And frankly, sometimes those things not working out aren't their fucking fault.
Yeah.
So, Jesse, thanks for your time.
I hope, as always, I was coherent.
Absolutely. You were. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Confluence Cast presented by Columbus Underground. Again, you can get more information on what we discussed today in the show notes for this episode at theconfluencecast.com. Please rate, subscribe, share this episode of the Confluence Cast with your friends, family, contacts, enemies, your favorite historian. If you're interested in sponsoring the Confluence Cast, get in touch with us. We can be reached by email at info@theconfluencecast.com. Our theme music was composed by Benji Robinson. Our producer is Philip Cogley. I'm your host, Tim Fulton. Have a great week.